Right. Hello, everyone. This is another episode of Conversations with Rob on the YouTube channel. Obviously, if you're listening on YouTube, you probably heard us on our 10 radio stations all over the country. So thank you for watching and thank you for listening also. I have a special guest on today. It's David Allen Arnold. He is a helicopter enthusiast, and he's, from the videos that I've seen him, he's amazing at doing that. He's also written 2 books. He's been on the Deadliest Catch show, and the books that he's wrote is Help from Above, How I Went from Sweeping Floors to Painting the Sky, and also his second book, What Lies Above the Clouds. So thanks, David, for coming on. Appreciate the time.
Thanks for having me on, Rob.
All right, so let's talk about, tell the viewers, I mean, we just kind of went through a little synopsis about you, but tell the viewers a little bit about you in general.
In general, well, you know, people ask what I do for fun. What I do for fun is take care of my little one. My son is now 10 years old, and so I've never missed a day with him, and I just love watching him grow. And we do everything together. We play video games. We watch movies together. We built a tree house last summer. That's pretty much what I do for fun. And then for work, as you said, I've been a helicopter cameraman for 25 years. So I've been working on Hollywood movies and TV shows. And from a very unique perspective, when I worked on James Bond, Pierce Brosnan was driving through an oil field with his brand new fancy BMW sports car. And we were flying next to him in our Airbus helicopter with a gyro-stabilized camera system that I could use to zoom in right onto him and the steering wheel as he went to meet the villains in the movie.
Wow.
And so that's what I've been doing for 25 years.
So Dave, tell me, you know, what got you into this field? I mean, you know, we all see helicopters. We'll talk about a lot of famous people with the Kobe Bryant incident, private planes in general. But what got you into the field of being a helicopter pilot, working on news stories and movies and TV shows?
Well, I wasn't planning a career in aviation. I wanted to work in the entertainment business, which in those days really meant television and film. So I used to knock on a lot of doors when I got out of high school. And if you were in the phone book, because that's how we found businesses in the 1990s, was you had to go to a thick paper book, which was full of alphabetical listings of people and companies. And if you were in the phone book for any sort of film or television, I would be paying you a visit in my neighborhood about every 2 to 3 weeks. And I would always come with enthusiastic demonstration. I'd have a portfolio with me, and you could see things that I had done. And I would always offer to work for free. Even I would just say, look, you don't have to pay me. I'll just work here, and then you can decide if you want to put me on your payroll. And one of the companies that I visited told me to get lost. They said, look, quit coming around here. We have no use for you. All we do are helicopter cameras. And I said, oh, okay. I didn't know what that is. So scratching them off my list. And strange thing happened. 3 weeks later, they called me.
Wow.
And the vice president brought me into his office for a job interview. And he just stared at me like a puzzle he couldn't figure out. He just couldn't understand who this crazy kid was who kept coming around asking for work week after week. And he said, look, here's the deal. One of my guys is quitting, and we work on all the big Hollywood movies and TV shows. We do Super Bowl, World Series. We do Steven Spielberg movies with our helicopter cameras. And he said, I could hire another guy from Hollywood or New York with a big resume and credentials. And he said, but I'm kind of intrigued by you. And he said, the only thing that you have going for you is you seem hungry. Are you hungry? And I said, oh yeah, I'm hungry. And he said, I'm going to make my decision of who I want to hire in the next 3 days, and I'll let you know. And so I left his office and I went back to my little apartment, And in those days, most of my furniture came from dumpster diving, my little apartment. And
Right.
I was taking the trash to the dumpster. And when I threw the garbage in, I saw something in the bottom of the bin that was the most perfect thing. And I dived into the dumpster head first and came up with an old, oil soaked, ripped up, worn out work boot that someone had thrown away. And I thought, this is how I can show the big boss at that company how hungry I am. So I went back to my apartment and I made a nice plate and I took a picture of myself with a fork and a knife cutting into that old work boot with a big smile on my face. And in those days, we had to actually cut and paste. So I cut the picture out, I pasted it to a sheet of paper, and I mailed it to his office. And his staff told me that the second he saw that picture, I had the job.
Wow. That's a really intriguing story. It shows a lot of hunger, as you stated in the story. I want to talk about, you talked about trying to be in the acting business growing up. And, we see a lot of kids in college go to school for acting in general and are hungry as you are. And they're in New York and LA too, and they just can't get a job. Talk about how it was. I mean, you did, say a little bit about it, but how it was, getting all those no's, because there's so many people in that field. It's just so hard to break through.
Well, that's the number one question I get when I travel the country. People see me flying for Survivor or Deadliest Catch or Monday Night Football. The helicopter camera that I use costs usually more than the helicopter. And
Wow.
it is extremely sophisticated, computerized, gyro stabilized technology. It always has a really expensive, complicated camera inside that you pretty much have to read a book before you can even turn the thing on.
Wow.
And people look at all that technology and all this expensive gear and they go, Dave, did you go to school for this? And and the next question they always ask is, how do I get a job like this, like what you do? And it's a fascinating question, both of them, because I don't have a college degree.
Wow. Okay.
I have a high school education, and I didn't go to school for what I do. And as you know, I was hired off the street, just a hungry kid off the streets, literally with no experience and no expertise. And I was hired literally for my attitude. They
Yeah.
just knew that if I was willing to show up on time, which I already did, even though I didn't work there, I kept showing up. And they knew that if I was willing to show up on time and work hard and not complain, that they could teach me anything else. I could learn the other stuff, and they knew that. And I found out over time that those are the things that companies really value over the long haul, because any business is going to have nothing but problems. Just one problem, one setback, one mistake after another. And they want to know if you're going to join their team, are you going to make those problems worse? And are you going to cop an attitude? Or are you just going to quietly and politely do your best to make things better and make it work, regardless of what's going on? One time, the company that hired me off the street after my boot picture, uh, they had sent the equipment to the wrong location.
Oh,
So
wow.
I had to, and this is how we solved that problem. There was no other way to do the job. I had to climb in the back of a box truck
Yeah.
and sit on top of the cases as we drove uh, across the country
Wow.
uh, to location. And I had to, so I'm in the back of this truck on top of these boxes, sleeping on the cases. We get to location. It took over 24 hours to get there. Get to location. I climb out of the back of this truck and take all those. It was over 1,000 pounds of cases with equipment in it.
Wow.
Took all those cases out of the truck, put the camera system together. Then I found that the camera was broken. So I had to work all night to solder wires and fix the electronics so that the camera could work. And it's amazing. We were shooting a commercial. I worked all night. I had just enough time to go to the crew hotel where everyone was staying.
Okay.
And as the crew was walking out of the hotel to get into the vans to go to the location, I was walking in. I went to my hotel room for the first time, took a shower, turned around, walked back out, and got in the van with him.
Wow, that's crazy.
And it was a fascinating thing when the commercial was over and everything was done. The producer of the commercial came up to me, and he started offering me different jobs with his company. And the cameraman was watching this because I was the technician, so I built the camera and he operated it. And he watched this conversation. The producer offered me like 3 jobs. Hey, would you like to do this, Dave? Or we have an opening here. You could work in this section of our company. And he walks away, and I looked at the cameraman and I said, what in the world? Why is he offering me a job? We had all of this problem with logistics. The camera was sent originally to the wrong state. Everything went wrong. You know, we had all these problems and stress. And the cameraman just laughed. He said, Dave, they know that. They know that things are going to go wrong every day. He said, today, there are things that went wrong that you don't even know about. Right. And he said, the producer noticed that you worked all night. You traveled all night in the back of a truck. You worked all night to get the camera working so that we could get the shot for the commercial. And he said, you never said a word to anyone about any of that. And he said, that's what they want. That's what companies want. And so the lesson for me is like, oh, okay. So that really opened my eyes to the idea that it's not necessarily a college degree that gets you in. It's not necessarily knowing the right person. It's actually even simpler than that. It's just even companies that aren't hiring, that don't have a job opening, are always looking for people who are willing to work really hard and not complain, and to just try and make things better every single day at work. They're always looking for that. And so that's how I got hired, because they weren't hiring when I got my job. They just noticed that I kept coming around. And in fact, they got annoyed with it. Finally, they said, quit coming here. We don't have any use for you. But unbeknownst to them, somebody in their company was getting ready to quit. So one of their staff left, and they were sitting around thinking of who they wanted to hire. And they remembered that I had a really positive attitude, and I kept coming to their office even though I didn't work there. And so that piqued their interest, and it was the kind of an attitude that they were looking for. So I love for kids to read my book, because that story of how I got hired off the street with no experience is in that book, Help from Above. And I love for kids today to read that story and to factor that in to their decision making when they're thinking of spending over $100,000 for a college degree, or just simply pursuing their dream. In my case, it was a dream of working in the entertainment business. And I had no idea how to get there or how to get a job. But it's great for kids today to hear my story. Excuse me. Yeah. It's great for kids today to hear my story and to think about, what might be a good move for them, when they come out of high school.
Right. No, I appreciate that. And that's great advice for the listeners. And like you said, kids growing up, and also people that are in kind of jobs that may be a dead end for them, that they can hear your story and say, hey, maybe it's time for me to go and sort out what I really want to do in life and try to hit it out of the ballpark like you did. So I appreciate that.
Where are you?
Where am I in job, or where
in the country?
In Florida.
Okay. What part of Florida?
We're in Orlando right now.
Orlando, yeah. So, have you ever heard of a little town called Brooksville?
Yes. Yeah, kind of near Tampa.
That's near Tampa. That's where I grew up. It is it's a very small town. in the hill country north of Tampa. It's very rural. And that's where I grew up. That's where I went to high school. And that's where I decided that I wanted to work in Hollywood in
Wow.
entertainment. And because that's where it was. And in the 1990s, when I got out of high school, there was no there was no YouTube. If
Right.
you wanted to work in entertainment, you pretty much had to be in California, in Hollywood, or in New York. That's where all the movies got made. That's where all the television companies were. And here I am in this little rural town of Brooksville, Florida, that has zero connection to any of that. In fact, it's as physically as far away as you can get
Yeah.
from Hollywood. And yet I knew that's what I wanted to do. And I didn't let it stop me that there were no companies in Brooksville that made movies.
Well,
That I didn't let the reality of that slow me down. I just knew that's what I wanted to do. And therefore I didn't take a job at Starbucks. I didn't take a job at uh, the local school. I didn't start working at a restaurant. I went for what I wanted to do. And in this case, it meant going to a business that I didn't even work for regularly and just offering to pitch in. So I'll bring you guys coffee. I'll sweep the floors, whatever you need. I'll take care of it. You don't even have to pay me. And it was that kind of enthusiasm that got me my first big break. And so I really encourage your listeners, like you said, even if they're at a job they don't like, take a step back from that and think about what it is that lights their candle. What is it that excites you as much as I was excited about working in the movie business, and find a way to move towards that. Even if you have no idea how to get there, just move in that direction and keep going. And because that's all I did.
Right. No, I appreciate that. So let me say, I know you said you were in Brooksville and stuff. So, we're talking about in the 90s. So Disney was opened up. Universal had opened up, I think it was in 89. They were doing some small productions there. Why not, make that hop, skip, and the jump to Orlando, build up from there, try to get something over in that area instead of going all the way to California? Just curious.
Oh, I did. I did
Okay.
it. And in fact, the company that I visited regularly was in Melbourne.
Oh, okay.
So that's just east of Orlando.
Right.
And so I did. So I in those days they had a little newspaper called the Blue Sheet that was for entertainment job listings,
Okay.
and it included Miami, it included Orlando.
Right.
So if you had any kind of a listing or outreach whatsoever regarding film and television, I knew who you were. And I keep in touch to this day. There are people that I met during those years when I was just trying to find any kind of work in the entertainment business. There are people who I met who I keep in touch to now, 25 years later. We still talk all the time. And so that includes Orlando.
Okay, great. So I want to get into the books, and then I want to get into some helicopter stuff. But first of all, you talked about getting the job. We just spoke about that. Did you have any flying experience? I assume not. And how did
Zero.
you feel like going into, okay, so zero. So how did you feel like jumping into that pilot seat? I don't know if that's the correct terminology for that, but jumping into that seat and taking off, and like, did you like flying? Were you nervous? I know some people are nervous flying. How did all that work?
Well, I was nervous. They had recently had a helicopter accident in Hollywood, and they one of the pilots was killed.
Oh,
And when they hired me, my supervisor pulled me aside and he said, Dave, this is really dangerous work. Not very many men make a long career out of this. And so I was very intimidated, and definitely, just like anyone, nervous about being in an aircraft
but
that
Dave, were
could
they
have a
just saying
problem. And
that to intimidate you? That you know, not a lot of men work for this long. Were they just trying to do that to kind of put the pressure on? You know, at the beginning of a job, they always say, "Hey, you got to do this," and they try to like push your buttons a little bit to make sure you do the job right. Do you feel like that was the case, or is that true?
No, he was giving me advice. He was basically saying, "Look, you should think about if you really want to do this, um, because it is dangerous." And like I said, someone had just been killed, uh, and I saw all that happen. And over the years, I've lost many colleagues who died in helicopter crashes, and and so that was something I had to think carefully about because it's a funny thing. I always tell people to be careful what you wish for. Here, I had wished to work uh, in the entertainment business, in movies and television, and this door swung open, and they said, "Come on in. You can work on movies and televisions. In fact, you can work on the biggest movies and the biggest TV shows in the world, uh, right off the street. Just start, just come on in. And by the way, you're going to be flying above those movies and TV shows in a small aircraft." And so that was a decision I had to make. I really thought about it because I had no interest in aviation. Aviation to me looked like a scary enterprise. And and so it was funny how they offered me the thing that I dreamed of, but it was different than I had imagined. And they were taking me straight to the top. So I didn't work for 20 years. I didn't work for 20 years and then step onto the set of a Steven Spielberg movie. That happened in the beginning. I went straight from being a hungry kid off the streets right onto the set of big movies and TV shows. But it was my job was to fly in a helicopter above Steven Spielberg as he yells action and they blow up a bridge. and um and so there was a risk involved. But I thought about it and I just said, screw it. Let's go. This is my dream. This is what I want. So even though it's not how I imagined it would be, I still went for it. And I don't know, there's not, and to my boss's point, there's not very many people who've been doing it for 25 years like I have. And I have no regrets. There's definitely risk involved. There's helicopter crashes in my book, Help from Above. And those were terrible experiences. And but I went for it.
So I was just going to ask you, and we'll definitely talk about both books in a moment. But so I assume that you have crashed then. Now, what you saying that, or definitely had some close calls?
Yeah, absolutely. I've done everything you should never do in a helicopter, and those stories are in my book. Okay. And the one thing I'm very honest about in my books is my mistakes. And there are many times where I did risky things that you shouldn't do, just because I just didn't know any better, and I wasn't smart about it.
So was this earlier on where you did these kind of mischievous?
Yeah, I learned the hard way. So if anyone in your audience learns the hard way, I do too. And that's how I am. And so in the books, I'm very honest. I never complain about, being a helicopter that's crashing in the woods. I always admit that it's partly my fault that I'm even there. And that's a problem I kind of created for myself.
Right. So I have watched some of the videos on your YouTube channel, which were really impressive and cool for me to watch. I know you were on the Deadliest Catch. Can you talk up to the viewers about how some of the movies and some of the cool scenes maybe you've done, TV shows you worked on, movies in general?
Yeah, movies in general. Let's see. I worked on The Sum of All Fears. I worked on what else did I do? I was on the set of Titanic for a day. I delivered a part to them. I worked on James Bond, The World Is Not Enough. that was really cool. And that was a great example of just being a hard worker. Many times in my career, I would come to be a technician and work on the camera. And James Bond was one of those movies where I was just setting up the camera, building it on the aircraft, loading the film. That's what we shot with in those days.
Yeah.
And threading it through the camera. And then when the cameraman would fly with the pilot and film James Bond, they would come back and land. I would take the camera apart, remove 1,000 feet of exposed film, put it into a dark room and remove it, put it into a can that could be sent to the laboratory. That's the kind of stuff I did every day. And James Bond was one of those projects where, because of logistical problems that no one anticipated, the cameraman had to leave. And many times in my career, that's happened. And because I was so humble and worked so hard for the cameraman, he told the producers, and I watched him do this. He said, look, you don't need to bring another cinematographer from Hollywood. Dave can do this and he can finish the movie. So just let him shoot it. And that saved the company a lot of money. They didn't have to hire someone and fly them around the world to get to, in this case, Azerbaijan, where we were filming. And next thing I know, I'm sitting in the sea in the helicopter steering the camera while James Bond drives through the oil fields of Azerbaijan on his way to meet the villains in his fancy car. And so basically they promoted me on the spot to go from being a lower level sort of camera technician to being the helicopter cameraman or director of photography for that scene. And it was really just because the cameraman knew that when he was there, I was always working for him. I was dedicated. So before he ever set foot in the aircraft, I would have been working for over a week just to make sure that every single thing, every part and piece of what he needed was there. And after he shot the film, I would follow up with the laboratory and check each roll of film and make sure there were no problems with it. Or if there was a problem, I would then communicate between all the people in the movie of what went wrong and how, what options they had to correct it. And so he knew that. And so when he left, he felt comfortable to give me an opportunity to do his job. Wow. And it's a scary thing. You think about it. It's, those guys work for decades to get to that point where they can shoot James Bond from a helicopter. And so to allow me to sit in their seat and do their job is a big deal. Because now they're basically making me a competitor.
That's great.
Potentially they could lose the next job on a movie because that same producer might hire me to operate the same camera. And so it was a big deal to let me do that work. And like I said, it was because I always worked so hard for my boss and took such good care of them that they always felt comfortable to let me sit in their spot if there was a problem and they had to leave the country in this case. And I think that's a really important lesson for kids today, is to remember, it's not just your ambition. It's not just your goals that matter when you're in the world of work. It's how hard you're willing to work for other people, because those people can open doors for you in a way that you won't see coming.
That's great advice, and thank you for that. I want to talk, I saw your pictures of flying over the Cubs when they won the World Series, and a few other pictures that you've taken. Is it scarier, and I assume it is, to film a movie scene where they're blowing up buildings and doing all these crazy special effects and this and that, than to film, going over the Super Bowl? You talk about Sum of All Fears. I assume you talk about the scene when they went over the Ravens Stadium with that. So is it scary to do a movie scene with all that craziness, or just the sports, where you're just kind of going over?
They're different. Every job has a risk. And the risk of those two jobs are different. It's interesting doing the World Series because over, probably 15 million people are watching.
Yeah.
So when I panned from the city of Chicago over to Wrigley Field with our gyro stabilized camera as we're circling the stadium, if I do anything wrong, 15 million people are going to see it right then.
Right.
So there's a little bit of pressure involved with that. And working on a movie is a different pressure. It's just a very difficult job to get, is to be on that movie. I mean, people work for decades to even get an opportunity to work on a big Hollywood action movie. And so, there's different stress, there's different problems involved in all of that. The live television is a fascinating process. You're talking about over 100 people all performing real time to make the World Series. And when the pitcher throws the ball, before he even throws the next pitch, there are workers in tractor trailers on electronic consoles who are replaying the pitch that he just threw in super slow motion with an animated graphic to show you the strike zone as the ball curves towards the plate.
Yeah.
And all of that's happening before the pitcher gets back to the mound to wind up for the next throw. And that's because over 100 people are all performing in unison and in concert at exactly the right moment to put the graphics on the screen, to cue the announcers to talk about the guy who's hitting and what his stats are. All of that's happening real time. Meanwhile, at a World Series, there's an airplane circling over Wrigley Field, and I'm in it with my gyro stabilized camera system. And same thing, the director is talking to 30 camera guys. Ready 2, take 2, ready 4, take 4, ready 20. If I'm camera 20, ready 20, take 20. And that's it. Boom, I'm on the air. And I'm zooming into the pitcher's mound from 2,000 feet. And that's all happening real time. And it has to happen perfectly. So it's an amazing energy to be a part of a live production.
Right.
And Hollywood movies are fun. They're just very prestigious, just to be around the big, The Rock or Bruce Willis is just a cool thing. People always love to hear about big Hollywood movies.
Right. I assume, I guess now that you put it that way, it's a lot tougher with live, because if you make a mistake, like you said, 15 million people will see that, hey, this guy screwed up. Whereas, movie, you can do the takes and, but there is still pressure on the movie. So now I hear you with that. I want to talk about, helicopters. So we did talk about, and this is where I wanted to go with you, and I will talk about your books after this. With the helicopter issue with Kobe Bryant, we've seen that, from hearing on the news that it was a helicopter, it was a private helicopter. It was a foggy day. We hear that from people on ESPN, people on CNN, whatever it may be. But why would a guy take a risk at flying a helicopter in a foggy day? There was also talk that apparently that helicopter wasn't equipped with there's some sort of technology that if there's a hill coming up, that the helicopter, gives that signal. You would know more about that than me, but why would somebody fly in a foggy day? I mean, it sounds kind of ridiculous.
Well, I mean, you're right to ask those questions. I think the thing that was most upsetting about that morning is that millions of people suddenly felt grief-stricken because it was as if a member of their family had been taken away. People were born and grew up to adulthood watching Kobe Bryant play for the Los Angeles Lakers, and they knew so much about him, and they followed his ups and downs with his career and his personal life, and everyone felt like they knew Kobe Bryant personally. And so it was a very emotional shock to hear that he was gone. As far as the details of the accident, The NTSB is going to look at everything from the fuel in the aircraft to the parts on the aircraft to the radio calls that were made, the radar track eyewitness accounts, what sounds was the aircraft making. They'll look at everything, and they may not know exactly what happened, but they will know as much as can possibly be known about the accident. And the bottom line is, Kobe Bryant had it all.
Yeah.
He had the best helicopter that money can buy. And for me, the moral of that story is not, how did this happen? It's just to remember that nothing is without risk.
Yeah.
Kobe Bryant did the safest thing you could do. He stepped into a very reliable turbine-powered twin-engine helicopter, which statistically is the safest way to travel. It's way safer than driving in a car.
Wow.
And so he did everything right. And so what this really is a freak accident. And those happen. There's nothing. If you look on my Instagram, you'll see videos of, because I love to repost police videos, and I love to repost motorcycle helmet cams.
Yeah.
Whenever I see one, I always repost it. And I put one on this morning of this kid is sitting on his motorcycle at a traffic light. The cars start to move, and another car comes from the opposite direction, from the cross street at about 30 miles an hour.
Wow.
Nails the car in front of him. That car flips over, and both cars run into his motorcycle. He tumbles off the motorcycle, gets up, goes, "I can't believe I'm alive." He walks over, and he just falls backwards in the grass. Like,
Wow.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
that just happened, and I'm still alive.
Crazy.
And so the moral of Kobe Bryant's accident is very similar. It's just, something can come at you without warning and without reason. There's no reason for Kobe Bryant's helicopter. It's way better than the helicopter I fly in to have a problem. And so the lesson is, if Kobe Bryant can go down, I can go down. Any of us can at any moment. And then the next question is, well, if you don't know how long you're going to live, and we don't, how are you going to live? What are you going to do today? And the one fortunate thing about me is I do exactly what I want to do.
Yeah.
And I didn't just take any job I could find when I got out of high school. I went for what I wanted to do. And therefore, whether I live a year or 30 years from today, I'm going to be happy. I'll die happy. Don't worry about me if I die in a helicopter crash, because I can tell you for a fact that I fully lived. And so that's my feeling about Kobe's accident is, it can happen to any of us.
Well, let me ask you this. As you said, you've flown for, you said about 25 years, 20 years, correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So with that kind of experience, if you, and I'm not trying to put you in a weird position, but just to get your aspect on this, if you were in that position where, it is a safe helicopter, you're a veteran pilot, I'm sure he had a veteran guy on there that was his regular guy, because he flew from the Staples Center to his house consistently when he was playing. So he was experienced in that. You were living in California, so you know that the conditions weren't the greatest on that day. Would you have said, "Hey, Kobe, it's not the greatest conditions. Let's figure out a different way to get to wherever they were going"? What would you have done in that situation?
Well, there's nothing unusual about the weather that day. It was just a typical marine layer fog, which we very commonly have here in Los Angeles. The moisture comes off the ocean, it hits the ground, and it just has a natural condensation. So there's this, they call it marine layer fog. It's just this cloud that comes off of the ocean and covers the city. If you've ever seen a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge with the spires sticking up out of a cloud, that's the fog that was stretching across Los Angeles the day that Kobe crashed. It's not unusual. It's very common. And the pilot always has to make a safety decision, whether he's going to take off, whether he can land, whether he can continue to fly.
So you're used to that.
There was nothing unusual about that. And it's not like Kobe took a tremendous risk to fly that day. And as far as, what happened, did the pilot make a mistake? Was there something wrong with the aircraft? I can't speculate,
Yeah.
but I'm very comfortable to wait for the scientists who are doing the pathology on the accident right now to just study every detail, which is what they're going to do, and then report back to us in a written report. It's going to be a massive report when it goes public, and to say, okay, this is what we know about what happened that day, and I'm very comfortable with that. I think we're going to get a lot of answers when the reports come out of what happened at Kobe.
Right. Thank you for that. Being from Florida, we don't see as fog like that. So it's just a question that I wanted to get, somebody that's experienced as yourself to the opinion on. When I think of this, I know it's a different kind of situation. I do go back, and I'm only 29, but I do go back into history and a person that's in history and think of the JFK Jr. when he was flying his own plane. I know it's two different vehicles, but when he was flying his plane, it went into a fog and that plane crashed. Does that make you, what do you think of that? I know you're old enough where you know that story also with the JFK Jr. plane where he crashed. Is it different? I mean, like I said, two different vehicles, but is it different? Is it safer to fly in a plane like that, or is it safer to fly in a helicopter? What would you think about that?
Well, JFK Jr.'s accident is a very sad story. His airplane was fully capable to fly in those conditions. In fact, if he had known how to operate certain systems on the aircraft, it probably could have flown him to the airport by itself. It was a very capable machine with a lot of automation built into it, similar to an airliner. And so it's very unfortunate. JFK Jr. Basically got caught where he couldn't, because the visibility had diminished, he couldn't tell which way was up. So basically, if you're in an aircraft and the pilot loses spatial orientation, it's basically just take a white plastic shopping bag and put it over your head, and then try to drive your car. That's how hard it is. And there are ways to do it safely, but you have to be very experienced to do that. And so when JFK Jr. crashed, he had just lost the ability to tell which way was up, and it's a very easy trap to fall into. But we don't know what happened to Kobe. The reports from the JFK accident have not yet been done on Kobe's crash. So we don't really know what went wrong, or what was the cause of the accident. And like I said, sometimes you never know exactly. Sometimes all they can tell you is, we know this and this and this. This was the weather. This was the aircraft. This was what was said on the radio, and this is how we found the crash site. Sometimes that's all they know.
Right. Have you flown in a plane before? I know you do helicopters pretty much, but
yeah, I fly in airplanes all the time. If you go to my Instagram, there's a really cool picture of the airplane that we flew in for the World Series, and it has a glass nose. So it's this amazing. It's made by a company called Vulcan Air, and that's this amazing glass airplane that the pilot sits in the front, and there's nothing in front of him except glass. It's really cool.
so
And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
And so I fly in those airplanes a lot, especially for things like the World Series or Monday Night Football. Every year I fly a lot in those airplanes.
Is it safer to fly than drive? I mean, I believe it is, but we also have heard those cases where, you talk about the visibility, but then to go against that, we do have crazy people driving on the roads. Like you brought up that story with the guy with the motorcycle. But they still, I remember that about a year ago where they had that plane where CNN was doing every 10 seconds a segment on where they never found the plane. I don't know if it sank into the ocean. I don't know if you remember what I'm talking about. It was an international incident, where they would it was the missing plane. Nobody knew where it went. I don't even know if they ever found it, but it was on consistently for days and weeks upon end. So what is your take on that? Do you believe it's safer to fly than drive?
Uh, First of all, they never found the Malaysian airliner that
Yes.
disappeared. The best they could do was to find pieces of it that had washed up around the world, but they don't know what happened to that flight. They do know that everything was turned off.
Yeah.
So
Strange.
uh, it's kind of like a James Bond movie at that point.
But
In,
you
in
have
other
trackers
in,
on
in
your
oth-
helicopter, right?
Well, in other words, if that airliner had had a problem,
Yeah.
say an engine malfunctioned or they had lost cabin pressure, um, you would have had probably 30 radio reports of exactly what was happening in the aircraft, what their plan was, if they were going to land, where they were going to land. So unfortunately, foul play is the most likely cause of the missing airliner. Um, Now, as far as the statistics of travel, um, there are an average of 30,000 people. 30,000 people will die in car accidents in the United States alone this year. 30,000.
Right.
And last year, I think the United States, I think they had one airline fatality.
Wow.
And so the
But
risk of driving in a car is exponentially higher for so many reasons. But just that motorcycle accident that's on my Instagram right now. This poor kid is minding his own business, riding his motorcycle.
yeah.
Why do you think he has a camera on his helmet to begin with?
Yeah.
You know
Sure.
what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
every time he rides that motorcycle, some kind of goofiness happens and he wants to have a video of it.
Yeah. Right.
and and so it could be that someone doesn't see him and comes into his lane
Yeah.
and potentially knocks him off of his motorcycle. It could be, in this case, a car coming from 90 degrees as they're all starting to drive forward on a green light. It could be a drunk driver. It could be somebody road raging at him. I have a really funny video. It's about a month ago on my Instagram of this kid with his helmet cam, and he's riding between the cars up to a red
Yeah.
light. The guy, it must have been in Florida, the guy in the
Probably.
pickup truck next to him just starts yelling at him. So he looks over at the guy and he's yelling. They yell back and forth. It's just this hilarious cover. The guy is leaning out of his truck,
Wow.
menacing this kid. I'm going to kill you. You can't ride between the cars. And
Probably in
and
Florida. Agreed.
oh my God, it's just typical. I mean, that's every time you get in your car, you're
Yeah.
surrounded by people who are texting, who
Yeah.
have been drinking, who haven't had enough rest. Sometimes they're sleepy and they just fall asleep and drive into stuff. Uh, I mean, it's chaos and carnage. And versus what Kobe Bryant did is Kobe Bryant went to an airport where all of the drivers are professionals.
Yeah.
So he got into an aircraft with not just some, Uber driver. He got in the aircraft with the chief pilot for that helicopter company, who is licensed and tested not only for his proficiency of flying, but also for his medical conditions. So every
Mhm.
year, pilots have to have a new clean bill of health reestablished by a physician every year. So Kobe Bryant's getting in an aircraft with a guy who has trained, certified, licensed, and is certified by a physician to be healthy enough to
Yeah.
fly the aircraft. And that pilot is not allowed to consume alcohol 8 hours before
Mm.
he starts the engine on that helicopter. You think that's the same standard on the roads?
Never.
No. No, people drive their cars to the bar.
Yeah. My goodness.
so
Scary.
so Kobe did everything right. He traveled in the safest way possible to get from one side of Los Angeles to the other for an
Yeah.
event, and his aircraft had 2 engines.
Wow.
So even if one engine died, he still could keep flying.
Yeah.
And he did everything right. He was flying in the same helicopter that Donald Trump owns and flies in his
Oh,
civilian life.
wow, I didn't know that. Wow, thank you for that information. So I want to ask you, I know we talked about airline, it's safer to fly as far as an airline or a regular plane. What about, I know you talked about all the craziness with the helicopter. Would you agree that that's safer than driving also?
Well, imagine if you're in a helicopter and the engine quits. Um,
Hmm.
in an airplane, if the engine quits, you have to have a flat surface to land on,
Yeah.
kind of like a freeway, or you hope to have a runway. But, if you're flying in hill country, you're going to have a problem when you come down
Yeah. I
and
can.
try to land the airplane without dying,
Right.
or if there's trees in the way. If a helicopter loses its engine, and that's how my book, How From Above, begins, is on page 1, the engine stops in our helicopter and we start to
Mhm.
fall out of the sky. But helicopters have landed when their engine stopped between cars in a parking lot. They
Yeah.
only need a space the size of the helicopter to land. They don't have to
Right.
have a long stretch of flat concrete to land like an airplane does. They can literally land on top of a roof. In Los Angeles, there was a news helicopter that lost their engine. They were flying over the high rises, and they literally landed on top of one of the skyscrapers.
Wow.
Uh, there's a helipad there, and they had enough room to
Yeah.
land and stop the machine uh, after their engine died. So that's what's really cool about helicopters, is their ability to come almost straight down if they have to, and
Mhm.
land in a space the size of the aircraft.
Right. Thank you for informing us about that. Lastly, I want you to talk about the books. So you did write the 2 books. We talked about the titles first, but the Help from Above, where you basically said, sweeping the floor to flying, painting the sky is your title. What was that about? Was that about the basically what you told me at the beginning of the interview about how you had that persistence? You went up to this guy and he finally gave you a job, and that's how the career started. And you talk about your career.
Yes, the
Okay.
story of my flying career is in Help from Above,
Mhm.
and how I got started is in there. And I literally, when that company hired me, I literally started sweeping the floor because that's all I was qualified to do. And and so all of those stories are in Help from Above. And the second book, Help from Above, book 2, What Lies Above the Clouds, is the story of also a true story, of a school bus stop in California where an organized crime ring set up shop and committed every form of crime that we have laws for. And the second book is the reason I'm writing books. I would have taken every story I just told you, I would have taken to my grave. I never even told my family what I do at
Wow.
work. And in 2013, I discovered an organized crime ring at a school bus stop. And I fought with them for 5 years to get them away from the kids and to make the kids safe. And in the process, I learned a lot about organized crime. And so for me, one of my only weapons against the bad guys was to tell the true story. And that story is in a book called What Lies Above the Clouds.
Wow, that's really impressive. So were they targeting, was it younger kids or high school kids? How old were the kids?
The kids were from elementary school to high school. The
Wow.
school buses were there 6 times a day to either pick them up or drop them off. And this crime ring committed every form of crime that we have laws for, including murder. In 2014, we found the body of one of their victims hidden behind the school bus stop. And that homicide has never been investigated by police.
Wow. That's really intense. Now, you just discovered this crime ring on your own, or was this something that you were working on for work and you just kind of,
No, I tell the whole story day by day.
wow.
Uh, One of my best friends and one of my work colleagues had just died in a helicopter crash. So I wasn't working uh, and my career slowed down. So I was just enjoying my life at home. And minding my own business. And one of my neighbors complained that there were scary looking guys at the school bus stop. So I went to take a look, and sure enough, it looked like Murder Inc. had set up at the school bus stop. And I looked at the nearest gangster and I said, "What do you guys do here? What kind of business is this?" Because it used to be a chiropractor's office. So the kids wait for the school bus in front of a chiropractor's office. It was the safest place to be. And all of a sudden, the chiropractor's gone, and it looks like Murder Inc. has moved into the school bus stop. And I asked the nearest gangster, I said, "What kind of business is this?" And he looks me up and down, and he goes, "I can't tell you. It's a secret."
Wow, that's scary. Now, I
Wow.
know I don't want you to give away the whole story because I want people to read the book, but were you fearful of your life? I mean, there's some scary people, it sounds like, that you're talking to.
Well, I started to try and help the kids to make them safe again. And I organized a meeting of all of my neighbors. So every Monday we would have a meeting with all of my neighbors, and we would talk about how to make the kids safe, how to get law enforcement involved, how to establish boundaries between the gangsters and the kids. What can we do to, you know, keep the kids from getting injured or killed
Yeah.
in this environment. And within 6 months, I was the only one at the meetings. So all of
Wow.
my neighbors either got frustrated or frightened by these killers and didn't want anything to do with it. My neighbors wouldn't even make eye contact. They wouldn't even look at the place. And the kids
Wow.
have to stand there 6 times a day. And so um, it was very dangerous. It's not the smartest thing I've ever done. Uh, Organized crime is very powerful. It's just like you see in the movies. These are people who get away with murder, and I watched them do it. And I just had a very simple problem, which is I couldn't tolerate their criminal business endangering the kids at that school bus stop. So I knew that the police were not enforcing the laws. Like I said, the police never investigated the murder victim that we found behind their building.
Yeah.
So I knew that, but I just couldn't let it go.
So
I
you
just
think they
couldn't.
were sorry to interrupt you. Do you think they were in cahoots with the police then?
I can't say who was in cahoots. I can just simply say what's in the book, which is
Mm.
I go to the school bus stop, I see this. We go into the woods behind the building, we find a corpse.
Right.
Uh, the police said they would come the next day to do a full forensics on the body, and which they're required to do by law,
Yeah.
and to investigate the homicide. And they did not. They came at midnight and they moved the body.
Wow.
Wow.
That's some shady stuff. Yeah.
That's shady. It's scary. And it's when the police are not enforcing the law,
Yeah.
and when the police are participating in the crimes, then no one is safe. And so it was a very, very intimidating thing. That's why all of my neighbors quit coming to the meetings. They were all terrified of what might happen to them.
Yeah. Well, it seems like if they got a hold of, I know you say you don't know, but it seems like if they did get a hold of the police, then they either got a hold of your neighbors or something went on. But
Oh yeah,
hopefully
people
go ahead. I'm
people would
sorry.
tell me. People would tell me. They would say, "Dave, I can't be seen talking to you anymore." And I would say, "Oh, why is that?" And they would say, "I'm afraid they'll kill us." And those are the ones that would still tell me why they weren't answering my calls or responding to my text messages. They would say things like, "They're threatening my business, Dave. I can't help you anymore."
Now,
And that's how it went.
is this like a gang? Like we hear about all these gangs. You know, I forgot what the name of the gang is, but the gang in California that they always talk about. Are you talking about that? Because when I think about organized crime, I'm an Italian guy. I think of the mafia, and I know that that's not really doesn't take place as much anymore. But that's what I think of. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about like
Well,
gangs?
there's a story in What Lies Above the Clouds
Mm-hmm.
where I brought the sheriff captain
Yeah.
to that's our highest ranking official from the sheriff's department in my town. We brought the sheriff captain to one of our Monday meetings to talk about the school bus stop. And I opened the meeting. I introduced the sheriff's captain, and I said, now, with all due respect to the workers at the school bus stop, they're not all criminals. And the sheriff interrupted me, and he said, He said, they are all criminals. I checked. So, that's why people were so intimidated. There were more criminals at the school bus stop than there are residents in my town. I live in a small town.
Wow. And this is right out of Los Angeles, right?
This is on a mountain above the city of Los Angeles. And it's an amazing, magical, rural place. Los Angeles is one of the biggest cities in America, but my town has the full-time population of 87 people. And
87, is that what you said?
87 people. And
wow.
I can see, I'm sitting in my house right now. I can see the asphalt jungle out my window, but I'm 5,000 feet above it, and I'm sitting in a cloud forest.
Wow.
In this amazing, quiet, rural, forested place in the middle of the Southern California desert. It's a really magical thing. And in fact, have you ever heard of Lake Arrowhead bottled water?
I've not, but I will look it up.
I'll bet you'll find it at Costco or Publix when you go to the store.
Wow.
It's sold throughout America. It's made by Nestle. It's called Lake Arrowhead bottled water, and I'm sitting next to the source. So Lake Arrowhead is about a quarter mile from my house. And that's the source of Lake Arrowhead bottled water. And that's where all this criminal chaos descended into this quaint, quiet, what used to be a very safe little neighborhood. And it was not a fun 5 years to deal with those guys. I can tell you that.
Wow, this went on for 5 years. Wow, that's incredible. But the situation has been solved, correct?
No, I don't consider it solved. I'll consider it solved when every single person who had a role in this is investigated and, if need be, prosecuted. Because these are criminal acts that should never, ever, ever be allowed around school children. And if you've allowed it for 5 years, I hope you go to prison.
Yeah. Wow. That's really incredible. I appreciate all the time you've given me. This is the last question. It's not really on the topic with as far as aviation goes, but since you brought it up, I know you said you live outside of Los Angeles in the county. We heard a lot in the past year about the wildfires. And it does have to do somewhat with aviation. Did you ever, I know a lot of news coverage did, pieces on that. Did you ever have to fly near some of these fires? And how was that going through all that devastation where that was going on for days and weeks?
Oh yeah. I have flown over wildfires. Wow. And it's an intense force of nature. It's like a hurricane, hurricanes hit Florida all the time, but we still live there. And, and it's just something that you accept and deal with. And it makes you feel small. When that hurricane comes, you can walk outside and stand in those winds, but, a tree might blow straight through the air and kill you. Because that's how powerful the storm is. And wildfires are the same thing. It's a very powerful force of nature that we do not always have the power to stop. And so we spend a lot of money and resources to try and protect homes and put the fires out. But when push comes to shove, a wind-driven fire can be impossible to stop. Yeah. And so even the most affluent, rich and powerful and influential neighborhoods like Malibu and Hollywood, they're not safe. Santa Barbara is a very beautiful, affluent community. And those fires went right straight into those homes. There was nothing that we could do to stop it.
Wow. Now, did that affect any of the area that you live in, though, Dave?
Oh, absolutely. Wow. The house where I'm sitting on the mountain above Los Angeles, 50 feet from my front door, the trees were on fire when they cut them down. The fire came right up to my house. And same, I have a place in the city. Same thing. The fire came right up to the place where I live in the city. And it's humbling. It
Scary.
makes you feel small, makes you appreciate life.
You ain't kidding. Now, but your house made out okay though? I know that's really
Yeah,
close.
my house was saved. So that fire was in 2003, and
Oh,
basically the firemen and the pilots uh, stopped the fire in front of
wow.
my house, and the entire mountain burned. So thousands of
Wow.
acres burned in that fire. The whole mountain burned, and in Los Angeles, vast areas of Los Angeles have burned, and it's a natural cycle. These are fires that have always happened since the dawn of time, except now there's houses on the hills that are burning, and so we do our best to stop the fires before they get to the homes, but sometimes it can't be done.
Do you feel like the fires have gotten worse over the years or just stayed the
Not at
same
all.
or
No, not at all.
same?
It's a natural cycle.
Okay.
We had a long drought in California, and
Yes.
that's when the 2003 fire happened. Um, just it's just you know physics.
Well, there was talk about something to do with the PG&E, something with the, is that the electric company over there? Something
Yeah,
with
I believe it was
that.
2 years ago. We had the deadliest fire in California history, and that was believed that it was started from the power lines. Um, but if you don't know this, we have a very strong environmental lobby in California. Um, they'll put you in prison if you step on an endangered cricket. And so they weren't allowing. They were suing the power companies to keep them from trimming the trees around the power
Oh,
poles.
wow. I didn't know that.
Okay, so yeah, so when the power lines hit the trees, that fire
Right.
started. That was the most deadly we've ever had. And it is something to think about. Is we all love the earth, we all love trees and green things, but at the same time, sometimes to be safe, we have to thin the forests, we have to cut the trees around the power lines, and a lot of that work is now being done because of that fire. And so it's just a natural ebb and flow of people arguing to stop uh, trees from being cut down, and then people arguing back and saying, hey, you know what, a lot of people just died, let us prune the trees.
Yeah. No, I agree 100%. Well, David, thanks so much for your time. And where can people get the books and learn more about you, follow you on Instagram, Twitter, whatever it may be?
Exactly. Social media. I'm on all social media. Look for David Alan Arnold, ALAN. And you will find thousands and thousands of pictures and videos of everything I just talked about: the airplanes, the helicopters, the TV shows and movies. It's all there. I shoot a lot of behind the scenes. There's a lot more coming. If you've seen my Instagram or my TikTok account, you're not even seeing 1% of what I document every year. I just have probably 50 terabytes of
Wow.
pictures and videos that I travel with. And so there's a lot of great stuff coming, and the books can be found on Amazon. Same thing, look for my name, David Allen Arnold, or Help from Above, and you'll find them. And thank you very much for taking the time to listen to these stories and to share all of this with your audience.
Yeah, David Allen Arnold, thanks so much for coming on. We definitely have to have you on again because you were
I would love to.
extremely informative. And these stories are something that people don't know. Not a lot of people knew about the fire issue. I know I didn't, and not a lot of people knew about the books. So people need to read those books. That was a fascinating story, like I said, about what you did with that crime ring. I mean, that's something that you know is a heck of a story. I think I'm interested to read it, and I would like to. So I'm looking
Thank you.
forward to it. All right,
Thank
thanks,
you very
Dave.
much.
Appreciate you. Have a great day. Okay.
You too.
All right. Bye.